Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, the Real Impact Edition, or series, if you will. I'm Richard Dugan, and with me is Dennis Henson, and we're talking about the stories within the Real Impact Daily Inspiration book that is available at realimpactbook.com, and also getting your free ebook version. Go down to the bottom of that page, click on the podcast attendee, and then put the information in, your email and so forth. The only thing you are going to receive via that email insert is a link to download the ebook. You can buy hard copy or a paperback that's also available in Audible form, as well as Kindle. If you have unlimited Kindle, you can get it for free. So a lot of opportunities. And Dennis Henson, great to have you back again. Here we are, February, talking about the man, as well as, for some people, the mystery, Abraham Lincoln, who, against all odds, became our 16th president.
Well, Richard, thank you for having me. This is a fun series.
It truly is, and we're going to jump right into that series, and we're going to move into a section that has to do with another part of Abraham Lincoln's story, the railroad windfall.
The railroad windfall. In 1857, Lincoln took another step toward destiny when he served as a lobbyist for the Illinois Central Railroad. After assisting them in getting a charter for the state, he was retained as the regular attorney. Upon successfully defending the ICR against the county in a tax matter, he received the largest fee of his legal career, $5,000, $166,000 in today's money. And by the time Abe became a prominent national politician, he was one of Illinois' most distinguished and successful attorneys. Lincoln's windfall from the railroad gave him the money and time to pursue his higher ambition, politics. Consequently, in 1858, he ran for the Illinois Senate. While Lincoln was inexperienced and awkward, his opponent, the incumbent, Senator Stephen A. Douglas, was rich, powerful, and charismatic. Fighting an uphill battle against a better-financed and more organized opponent, Lincoln planned to follow Douglas and speak in the same cities. Suddenly, the idea of battling him face-to-face came to mind. So he wrote Douglas and challenged him to share a debate platform. Douglas certainly had no desire to elevate Lincoln to his level, but the fear of being called a coward prompted him to take on this lightweight. So Douglas, planning to put him in his place once and for all, accepted the challenge. Many thousands came to hear, and hundreds of newspapers reported their contest. Still, it wasn't until the 1860 publication of those deliberations that the Lincoln-Douglas debates legend began. And though Lincoln lost the Senate race, his published words introduced him to the nation.
Now, one of the things that is interesting about this story, and we're going to hear the next segment here in just a few minutes about the Douglas debates, I have never heard them. I've never read them, but I'm guessing, what was somebody, a stenographer, taking notes so that because they weren't recorded as far as I know. There's no audio.
Well, there were hundreds of newspapers there. That's where the newspaper reporters wrote down everything that was said and compiled those, so that he lost the Senate race.
Right.
But he beat out the same person. He beat out Douglas for the presidency.
Yeah. Well, now I'm curious, did he win the debates? In those debates, did he win?
Well,
or
he won.
Was there such a thing?
No, he lost. No, the debates they were running for Senate. Okay. He lost the Senate race to Douglas.
Okay.
But because the nation liked what he had to say, he won the presidency over the same person, over Douglas and a number of others. And we'll learn that later on in the story. But had it not been, had Douglas not accepted this, Lincoln wouldn't be president. Right. Because it was the Lincoln-Douglas debate that made him famous and made him popular with most of the people in the nation.
Well, this is fascinating in terms of learning about Abraham Lincoln, and I'm learning more about him than I ever knew. And I'm glad I'm learning about him because he's referenced quite often during different campaigns for different offices on the national level in particular. And people will make comparisons. And I find that interesting. Those were different times, so different. One of the things that I was always intrigued by, and I've watched a number of westerns, for example, that take place in the early and mid 1800s, and the language that's used. And I asked an historian about that. And I said, "Did they really speak that well? They were that educated?" He said, "Yeah, they were that educated." Now, I understand Abraham wasn't. Abraham Lincoln was not. But in the West, apparently, their education, because most people came from the East where they were educated, out to the West. They opened up the West and so forth, maybe especially during the gold rush. And I find that interesting that they were so well spoken. And I have to say that I would think that they were probably more well spoken than we are today. I don't know what their vocabulary was, but I'm sure that it was thousands of words more than what ours is today, in a general sense. In a general sense, your thoughts?
Well, by this time, Lincoln was not uneducated. He had he had passed the bar. He'd read for 30 years. He'd taken lessons from the teachers in the communities. So by this time, he was very, very well spoken and on his way to becoming a great orator. So we're getting past the illiteracy and into the time where he was very literate and very well spoken.
Well, let's take our quick break here. We're going to move on, and we're going to take a trip. Being he was an Illinoisan, I guess that's how you pronounce it, moved on to Chicago. We'll move on to Chicago in our next segment as we continue here on the Real Impact Daily Inspiration series here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan along with Dennis Henson. And Dennis, we continue our travels, so to speak, with Abraham Lincoln, and we move on to Chicago.
Chicago. In 1860, Lincoln had just entered the race for the standard bearer of the newly formed Republican Party when Providence again appeared. This time it came from the city of Chicago. Chicago's businessmen, citizens, and politicians transformed Abraham Lincoln from an unknown backwoods lawyer into the Republican Party's candidate. Without her help, Lincoln would not have become the nominee. What was his appeal to the Windy City? He'd rarely visited there and had spent most of his time serving southern Illinois. Even though Chicago was a growing metropolis and was striving to be a refined city, its working people, the voters, loved Abe's Western man image. They saw his tall, muscular, rough-looking, and disheveled appearance as their kind of candidate. Once he began to speak, Chicagoans were captivated by his earnest and powerful delivery. His image of a poor man's Caesar was enough to convince thousands to support this rail splitter. Even though her masses got behind him, he still needed the support of the city's middle and upper classes. When Lincoln spoke to her working men, he also drew the attention of her wealthy. The influential Eastern Illinois businessmen believed him to be their business's best protector once they examined his policies. While Lincoln touted his humble origins to her masses, he proclaimed conservative fiscal policy, protective tariffs, and railroad expansion to the upper crust. The city's elites not only offered Abe moral support, they also poured thousands of dollars into his campaign. Although as great as it was to have her numerous support, that would be irrelevant if the city wasn't chosen to host the Republican National Convention, and the prospects of that were extremely low.
It reminds me of that old real estate slogan, location, location, location. Talk to us about this aspect of Chicago being that for that particular election, 1860 election, how so important.
Had the convention not been in Chicago, we'll find that out as we play the next couple of sections. Had it not been in Chicago, we wouldn't know the name Lincoln because they ushered him in by having control of everything that was going on at the convention. It's better to wait and listen, but they kept the people out that would have influence in the vote. They kept them outside of the building. They made it so that the people who supported Lincoln could get to Chicago for very little money, and then they controlled all the newspapers. So I think the best thing to do is just listen to a little bit more. It's just an amazing the events that happened following are just amazing.
All right, let's take a listen.
A site for the convention. Representatives of the Northern Republican segments gathered in 1859 to discuss the site of their convention. Each delegation argued it should be in its own locality. Cities like Buffalo, St. Louis, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Indianapolis seemed to have the upper hand on Chicago. However, the Illinois delegation lauded her as the only neutral site where everyone would have an even chance. Despite their allegiance to Lincoln, they never mentioned his name. After many votes, the choice came down to St. Louis and Chicago. Not to be outdone, the Illinois group pledged free food and a splendid reception for all the convention's members. As a kicker, they offered a grand convention hall at no cost. So with the promise of a cheap convention, the meeting site was snatched away from St. Louis by one vote, a single vote.
It's important to get out there and vote. They say it only takes one. It's like I said earlier in the program, in sports, you only have to win by one.
That's right. And that's so important right there, because that one vote could have derailed and we wouldn't know Lincoln. So that's another one of those, Providence?
Providence, divine intervention, choices were made, and it's incredible. It really is. We can actually move on if you'd like to. We can take a listen to the next segment here having to do with the competition in terms of this particular election.
The competition. Lincoln not only had the city's support, but was Illinois' favorite son. However, he would face a formidable list of more experienced and better-known opponents. William H. Seward was the most likely nominee. An experienced politician, he had been the governor of New York, a previous state, and the current United States senator. He had also amassed a powerful group of backers, a large amount of money, and the New York's delegation muscle. Seward brought many followers and a brass band, all in uniforms. The only thing he didn't have going for him was Chicago. Lincoln also faced two other formidable opponents, the well-known Republican senator and Ohio governor Salmon P. Chase, and the influential Virginia politician Edward Bates. Each of these men held high political offices at the national level, and both had powerful friends who could easily put them in the White House. In contrast, Lincoln had only served in the Illinois General Assembly and as an Illinois congressman. With the limited knowledge of a small-time politician, he couldn't possibly match his competitor's experience. So going into the convention, all signs pointed to an effortless defeat of the rail splitter.
And they keep referring to him as a rail splitter. He actually worked with one of those, he was a rail splitter. He actually did that hard labor.
When he was a kid, that's what his father would have him do. Neighbors, and they'd pay him. He rented his son out to split rails. He was just a young boy.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. And I will tell you that from my vantage point as a member of what they call the working class, that's the kind of person I want to see in the halls of Congress and the Senate, as well as in the White House. I want people who have calluses on their hands so they know what it's like to do the kind of work that we all do. To me, that's important. And I think it sounds to me like that actually sort of played, and let me ask you that question, did that sort of play in Lincoln's favor a little bit?
Well, that's why Chicagoans liked him.
Yeah.
They liked his, image of a Western Caesar, just a rugged person, a rail splitter.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons they embraced him, and the businessmen embraced him because of his policies.
And though I may be getting a little ahead of the game here, I'm just curious as to the margin of victory, and then because even back then they had the popular vote as well as the electoral vote. Am I correct in that?
Won the Electoral College by a landslide, but we're not quite there yet because
Yep.
he's got to get through the nomination.
Yeah. Right.
That's the tough part, getting through, because he had no business being the nominee. Those other guys had money, they had experience, they had major backing, but the Chicagoans played a few tricks and
Yeah.
got him in. That's
Yeah.
the next section.
That's the next section. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here, and we'll come back with that as we continue here on our Tell Me Your Story Real Impact series, Daily Inspiration. Real Impact Daily Inspiration is the book. RealImpactBook.com is the website. Scroll down to the bottom of that page, click on Podcast Attendee, and then put in the information to get your free ebook. You might also want to try to pick up a copy of the book, hard copy or paperback or Audible. If you have unlimited Kindle, you've already got it for free. Otherwise, please get yourself a copy of it and read it. Read a little every day from Real Impact or any other inspirational work that you have. That's one of the things Dennis has talked about over and over and over again, is to read something that inspires you, that uplifts you, that encourages you every day. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, and it's just as good if you listen to it in Audible as if you have the book in your hand and you read it. Although I will say, Dennis, there is nothing like holding a book. I love going into a library, especially the way that it smells with the paper and the ink. I don't know about you, when you were a kid going into your school's library or the public library in the city or town that you grew up in, it was just a wonderful, wonderful aroma. I don't know how toxic it was. All I know is it smelled good. You knew when you were in a place of learning and education in that regard. It was great.
All right.
Yeah. Well, we'll take a quick break and we'll be back with more here on Tell Me Your Story. And welcome back to Tell Me Your Story, new paradigms for a new world. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we're here with Dennis Henson, my co-host here on the Real Impact Daily Inspiration series. We hope that you're enjoying this, and we bring this to you on a regular basis so that people around the world, quite literally, not just in Santa Barbara and the surrounding areas, can find out more about the work Dennis is doing, but also the stories of these people who, many of them, they failed, and yet they persevered, and look where they wound up. And we're talking this month about Abraham Lincoln. Dennis, we're moving into a section a little bit more about the Chicagoans and a plot that they had cooked up. And we'll take a listen to that and talk about it when we come back.
The Chicagoans' plot. Understandably, Lincoln himself was skeptical about receiving the nomination. Yet, he'd underestimated the power of his backers. His Chicago supporters were not only well organized, but they also put together a flawless plan. Immediately following the site conference, their team sprang into action. Norman Judd, a prominent lawyer, persuaded the railroads to provide cheap fares for all parts of Illinois, so Lincoln enthusiasts could flood the convention without worrying about the cost. Then came their marketing campaign. Newspapers were the only media of the day, so the considerably influential Chicago Press began publishing articles promoting Lincoln as the nominee. That meant the first thing convention delegates would see in the morning papers was a strong endorsement of Honest Abe. Lincoln's devotees marched in the streets daily, touting the rail splitter. However, it would be on the convention floor where they would turn the tide. Prominent Chicagoan Norman Judd and Joseph Medill were conveniently appointed to handle the seating arrangement for both the audience and the delegates. Somehow, Lincoln enthusiasts found tickets easy to procure, while the other candidate supporters found gaining entrance difficult. Inside the convention hall were wall-to-wall Lincoln fans, while outside the attractively uniformed Seward protagonists had no way to influence the delegates. Therefore, the nation's representatives only saw a hall full of passionate Lincoln devotees touting their favorite son's auspices. Next, the Chicagoans carefully isolated the New Yorkers from the other state delegations who weren't in Lincoln's camp. They then secured a simple majority rule, and after accomplishing that, the plot's final and most crucial phase was put into action: behind-the-scenes politicking. It was common knowledge the battleground states of Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania thought Lincoln's competitors too radical on the issues to be electable. So the Chicago team took charge and, backed by a committee of their politicians, held closed-door meetings. They visited each delegation to convince them Lincoln was the only man who could glean the nation's support. Despite ethics, Lincoln's team stopped at nothing. They spread a rumor that 5 state governors had threatened to resign if Seward should be nominated. Then, without the authority to do so, they offered key delegates high-level positions in the Lincoln administration. Each man was assigned a specific state. Their goal was to cut off support for Seward and win them over to the rail splitter. Indiana was the first to be turned by promises of a prominent position in Lincoln's cabinet. The deals were struck with New Jersey and Pennsylvania, both fervent followers of Seward. Those delegates agreed to make Lincoln their choice should Seward show weakness on the first ballot. The team worked tirelessly until the last vote was cast. 3 of 4 battleground states were now in Lincoln's camp. It would be up to the Chicago delegates and their crowds to fan the flames. With negotiations closed and deals secured, all of Chicago watched as the convention played out.
You know, what's funny about this, Dennis, and I do mean funny, no matter how many things change, they stay the same because we're dealing with the same stuff here in the 21st century in our politics.
That's what I was thinking a while ago.
Yeah.
It's very similar to what's happening even today. So
It also seems to me that the delegates who were not allowed into the convention hall, it's like, wait a minute, hold on, you can't do this. I mean, this is what I would say. You can't do this. You have to let all of the people in there. But somehow they found a way to circumvent that. It's very, very interesting.
It is. It's a great story.
By the way, when did conventions start? When did they start having conventions to nominate an individual for the presidency?
I have no idea. And that's not something that I know.
I'll have to check into that because what's fascinating is, of course, in the 2024 or the 2023 campaign, we had a convention for both the Republicans and the Democrats, and they selected their nominee. And then we moved on with a different person than what we thought we were going to have on the Democratic side. And it's like, wait a minute, I thought this guy was, the one you were going to have, and then they switched. And then a lot of people got very up. And then this has to do with the primaries too. The primaries selected this one person, Biden. And then at the convention, boom, switcheroo, and you have Harris. And I find that rather fascinating. But again, kind of goes back to this whole Lincoln situation at the convention, where they didn't let the delegates in for the other potential nominees. To me, it's the same kind of thing, where all those votes in the primaries amounted to nothing. They didn't even count.
I agree.
Very, very unusual situation. So as we move through this story, we're gonna play another excerpt or another section here on the Republican convention, and then we'll maybe save the election of 1860 for our last program in February. But when the stories that, and we'll broaden this out now, step away from Lincoln for just a moment. When you when you began to select the stories? Obviously, you had so many that now you have volume 2. And did I hear you say volume 3?
Volume 2 is mostly the stories that I didn't put in volume 1, although I found some additional ones. It's going to be very good. Volume 3, I try not to get political or religious in volume 1 or 2.
Right.
Volume 3 is all about religion. It's about miracles that happen that change people's lives, that have to do with, but that 3 is a religious number. Anyway, so people don't have to buy that volume if they're not interested in that.
Now, in that volume, will you be looking also at, let's say, the sites of, say, Medjugorje and Lourdes and other sacred sites where people claim to have had certain miracles happen? Is that kind of where these stories will be taking us?
Not exactly. Some of the stories are about hymns that people know and how they came about. Like It's Well With My Soul, it's got a great hymn. The Love of God, it's a really great story, the background of that song. And then It Is No Secret What God Can Do. Whoa. Here's what happened. I was reading Facebook one day and I saw the name Stuart Hamlin. I didn't recognize the name, but the tears swelled up in my eyes and started rolling down my face. And I thought, whoa, what's going on here? This guy must have had something to do with my background. I mean, I must have known him at some point.
Yeah.
Turns out he's the one that wrote It Is No Secret What God Can Do. And my mother sang that to me when I was a child, and she told me this story of Stuart Hamlin. And I just didn't remember the name. It's been, 50 years since I heard it. But boy, you're talking about a powerful story of someone who had backslid and just gotten to the point where, I mean, he couldn't stand up. He was so drunk.
Yeah.
And where he just totally dropped. He was like you. He had a radio station. He was a famous radio. And so he went back to work and he told them, I'm not going to advertise beer anymore. So they fired him. So here he was converted, but he was he worked in movies. He was an extra in movies, and very, very well. He made a lot of money, but Hollywood rejected him once he quit drinking and quit partying. He didn't get any more jobs.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a really great story, but it's in Running Pack 3, and
Sure.
you just have to wait to get the rest of it. Of course, you can look it up if you want to.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, sometimes those stories can be really very inspirational too, even with people who may not aspire have a particular, shall we say, faith. They're searching like everyone else. Like, I'm searching too. I'm still trying to find answers to the questions that I've got going on in my head, so I think that's going to be a good book. I really do. Another good book that you can pick up is, of course, the first volume, Real Impact: A Daily Inspiration, by Dennis Henson, who is joining us here on the program today, and throughout this series. Throughout 2025, as we talk more about this book, we encourage you to get a copy at the website, which is realimpactbook.com. Go to the bottom of the page, click on the podcast attendee link, and then put your email information in there, and you will be sent a link to download the ebook. You can also purchase a copy through that same page, realimpactbook.com. Whether it's hardcover, paperback, you can go to Amazon and order it Audible, which is the reason why we're able to bring you these excerpts. And I'm really kind of happy that we are able to do so. And then we also encourage you to remember that if you have unlimited Kindle, you already have it available. Just key it in there. You get it for free there through Kindle, unlimited Kindle. So hope you'll do that. And I hope you'll stay with us as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. Welcome back to Tell Me Your Story. Dennis Henson, my guest. He is the author of Real Impact, Daily Inspiration, and we continue our conversation about none other this month of February than Abraham Lincoln. And we are now basically ready to find out more about the Republican Convention.
The Republican Convention. When the meeting was called to order, the New Yorkers rose first and exclaimed support for their favorite son, Seward. His few devotees inside the hall applauded so loudly that it annoyed the other delegates. Nonetheless, the work of the Chicago team started paying dividends when Lincoln's name was first mentioned. One reporter recalled, 5,000 people jumped to their feet at once. The audience erupted like a wild colt with a bit between his teeth. It rose above all cries for order. Again and again their irrepressible cheers broke forth and bounced off the walls. Their outcries were repeated to the dismay of other delegates. Seward took the lead on the first ballot, but failed to take the majority. Simultaneously, behind closed doors, the Chicagoans again put their plot into action. The second ballot showed a remarkable improvement for Lincoln. The tight race now stood between only two, Lincoln and Seward. The tension in the hall was palpable. When the voting continued, Lincoln received gains from Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, bringing him within an eyelash of victory. The packed hall was about to burst out at the seams with tension at a fever pitch. Seconds passed, like hours, as the vote came down to Ohio. 10,000 eyes were fixed on the delegation from the Buckeye State. After what seemed like an eternity, Ohio announced that 4 of her delegates had switched their votes to Abraham Lincoln. One reporter wrote, "There was a brief moment of silence. Then there rose a noise like a rush of a terrible storm." Outside the hall, cannons fired and people danced in the street. All of Chicago rejoiced for their favorite son. The real splitter was the Republican nominee for President of the United States. From the celebration, you'd think Lincoln had already won the presidency. And though Honest Abe walked away with the prize, he realized that he wouldn't be nominee had the convention been held elsewhere. And he knew his chances of actually becoming president were abysmal. In fact, his prospects were so poor that it would probably take an act of God for him to triumph. So despite the cannon fire, street dancing, and hoopla, the Democrats were still sure to win the election, and though Lincoln had his party's nomination, his ascent to the presidency was improbable, if not impossible.
Is it my correct understanding that he is or has been is considered to be sort of the father of the Republican Party, or had it been established a few years earlier and he became the Republican nominee?
Well, it was a brand new party. He was the first nominee.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So he was the very first Republican nominee and the first Republican president. And he shouldn't have been. I mean, all of the things that have led up to it, you can see. If anything had gone wrong, it wouldn't be. But still, even now, at this point in the story, there's no way he's going to win. All the Democrats have to do is to come up with a nominee with their person. That's all they had to do.
Yeah.
But they split in two. Well, that's the next section. But
yeah,
it was a miracle.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into that next section shortly. One of the things that is so interesting when I listen to the story of Abraham Lincoln and this process that's going on, and what little I know about that one, let alone what I know about modern day conventions and so forth. And yet there is a certain element of similarity on one level, and yet location doesn't matter so much anymore. It really doesn't. In spite of the fact that I heard that the swing states listed back then in 1860, Pennsylvania was one of those as it is today, which I find very, very interesting. No coincidence, in my opinion. There's a reason there. It's fascinating. Pennsylvania is still a swing state.
Well, things were different then. Travel was different, a lot different. The reason it doesn't matter so much now is because you can get to anywhere really, really quickly. But back then you couldn't. it was a task to get from one big city to the next.
Yeah. Well, we obviously now we have the internet, we have, well, of course, even prior to the internet, we had television, satellites, and so forth. And even going back decades, location really didn't matter because you could bring everybody into the convention hall from their living rooms, you know.
Right.
And it's just it's a whole different world in which we live today, and a whole different it seems like a whole different set of criteria are required, and yet at the same time, if you still have those people who put out they have that plot that was mentioned, and they put out rumors, they weren't true, and it was next to impossible to, of course, fact check them before anything else happened. Or even today, you try to fact check, and you hope you get the accurate information. It's like, well, who do you go to for the correct what source has the correct information? That kind of thing. It's the more things change, the more they stay the same, as like I said earlier.
Right, and you're dealing with politicians, which they haven't seemed to change very much.
No, you're absolutely right. Dennis Henson has joined us here on the program. Dennis, if you would like, I'm curious about your observations, because we've sort of talked about it a little bit here, going back and forth between 1860 and 2024. Not necessarily speaking of specifics, but in general, do you feel that back then elections based upon the stories were carried out in a proper and honorable way? And I still believe that they're carried out in a proper and honorable way today, despite what some people might say.
Lincoln was a student of history. He had read the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the history of America. All of these things meant a lot to him,
Mm-hmm.
which went into his philosophy of how things should be. So he moved the nation back to being proud of the nation, being proud of being America.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to be kind of like a pendulum. If you look back from then until now, you can see the citizenry being proud of the country to where they kind of ashamed of the country, and then they come back to being proud. So it's like a pendulum swinging, and we're still witnessing it today. And the pendulum right now is just really swinging back from I don't want to say socialism. I want to say from liberalism to conservatism.
Mm-hmm.
It's swinging really hard toward conservatism right now, but for the last 8-10 years, it's been going the other way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always been that way. And not even in just America, but when I was in college taking music history, we talked about music swinging from sacred to secular, and art swinging from sacred to secular. And that's just the way things happen, and probably will always, unless it gets too far. Now, if one gets too far, then that's what happened to Russia.
Yeah.
That's what happened to China. That's what happened. So, yeah, we're lucky that we haven't swung too far in either one of the directions.
Yeah. I put in that category too, I think, wouldn't you? Germany also swung in that
Right.
direction too, back and forth, back and forth. And it is a pendulum, and things change. And I, on the one hand, I think that's a good thing, but at the same time, my observation is that we keep swinging back and forth, but we don't seem to be making any progress, and
No.
that's the challenge.
Yes, but this book is not about politics. It's
No,
not
not at all.
It's about personal progress.
Yeah.
So if everybody makes personal progress, then everybody benefits.
Yeah.
The people that live with the people who become successful benefit, the community benefits, everybody. So that's one of the good things about Real Impact Daily Inspiration. It moves people towards success, and that kind of spreads.
Yeah.
It makes things better for more than just one person.
Yeah. I had a buddy who had this bumper sticker on his car, and he says, I love my country. It's the government I don't trust. And the reality is, I know this sounds kind of strange. And again, I understand, and we all understand the book is not political in any way, shape, or form. But the reality is that it is the people, and it says it in our founding documents. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, et cetera, et cetera. We, the people. We are the ones who make the choices. We are the ones who vote. We are the ones who help in times of trouble, like here in California with Los Angeles and the fires, or Florida and the hurricanes, or the Midwest and the tornadoes, and whatever other item you want to list. And that's where a lot of the inspiration comes from, when people step up and do sometimes the unthinkable, the unbelievable. What you wouldn't think that a human being could, let's say, lift a car off of another human being, and yet we have story after story and example after example of people with sometimes with superhuman strength, shall we say, or they just step in and do something that is so miraculous, which I think is where Volume 3 comes in.
Yeah, it's funny you said that. When I was a young kid, I was sitting on the back porch, and we lived on the curve, and the lady didn't, she was in a convertible, and she didn't make the curve. And her car rolled over several times and ended up upside down. And my father walked over there and picked the car up and held it up while someone pulled her out.
Wow.
I saw it. It really happened.
Oh, well, that's extraordinary. That is truly, I hope that story gets in the book somewhere in the volume.
Well, you just reminded me of it. But my
Yeah.
mother told the story a lot of times, but I know it's true. I saw it happen.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. And, but that's where sometimes we get our inspiration. Against all odds, we persevere. We make it through. And we can do that. We can. You said it at the beginning of one of these programs, that we can do anything. You were quoting one of the people that you're reading right now, and
Dale, probably.
Dale Carnegie, and it's just incredible, the power. Matter of fact, one of the questions that I used to ask at the end of the program to my regular guests on the other programs that we air is, how powerful are we? And I will put that to you based upon everything that we've talked about up to this point. Even using Lincoln as an example, how would you categorize the level of power we have? How powerful are we as human beings?
I don't think it's measurable.
Okay.
The little part on the first, if you go to realimpactbook.com and click on the lamp mystery,
Mm-hmm.
it explains just how powerful this thing is,
Yeah.
which is the human will,
Right.
or its
Right.
burning desire. So, and we're going to play that in one of the next sections. But if
Yes.
you just go to realimpactbook.com and just where it says the lamp mystery, click on it. It has a little recording there. You click on the arrow and listen to that, and that will move you.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
it's very interesting and very powerful.
Indeed. And I hope these programs are powerful and that people are hearing the message that you are conveying through each of these stories here on Tell Me Your Story. This is the Real Impact Daily Inspiration Series. And we hope that you'll join us each week. Go to the podcasts and the video casts as well. You can get them on demand in that regard. Go to realimpactbook.com. Get your free ebook copy by scrolling to the bottom of the page, clicking on the podcast attendee link. But maybe before you do that, stay at the top there, click on the lamp mystery link and listen to that audio. First of all, Dennis, and you don't need to comment on this per se, but the voices that have been chosen, both for that as well as for the Audible book, perfect voices. And we want people to get copies of the book, whether it be hard copy, paperback, Kindle, Audible, and listen to it, read it, share it with your family, your friends, because that's how we'll change the world. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love Talal. Jeanette, I am still listening. Mike, you left too soon. Doug, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.